Hey kids team, it's Pastor Jonathan. Thanks for watching this quick video. Nope, it's not going to be a quick video. Thanks for watching this regular. Nope, it's not going to be. This is going to be a long video. In fact, this is probably going to be one of those videos that I'm going to say, don't watch this on 1.5 times speed. Don't watch this on 2 times speed. Don't actually be washing dishes while you do this. This is one that deserves your full attention. And so specifically to my children who are watching this video, put it on regular speed. We need you to focus because this is a super important topic. We're going to be talking about safety specifically regarding preventing and identifying abuse. This is one of those topics that insurance providers require for our general liability, and I require of my team because it's so important to the witness of Jesus Christ. So before we go any further, let's take a moment to pray and dedicate this to the Lord because this is important. Jesus, we ask that you would use this time to help our hearts and minds be attentive to what you would have us do, to be your light and to bring the kingdom of heaven here to earth. Use us, we ask, Jesus. Amen. Okay, you ready? Let's jump in. Who does Jesus want you to protect? Who does Jesus want you to protect? So you're thinking, well, everyone, okay, but can you really protect everyone? I mean, I would need to protect my kids. Okay, yeah, you want to protect your kids. Who else? You know, I think about the story of the Good Samaritan, where Jesus pointed out that the neighbor could be anybody, but really the neighbor was anybody that you encounter that needs help. And that's the way I'd like you to think about the answer to this question. Who does Jesus want you to protect? Well, it's anybody that you come into encounter with that needs your protection. If you come across a child, guess what? Jesus wants you to protect him or her. And when we talk about abuse prevention, I want you to think about this. What difference would it make if Lakeview Church could prevent sexual or physical abuse for the kids who came through our ministry? If we had a way of preventing abuse, what would that do for our kids? Would it give them some freedom, some hope? Would it give families a sense of trust, a sense that God could maybe be a safe person? Just think about that for a second, because I know that it's going to at times seem kind of like, oh man, this is a hard topic to talk about, or it might be hard to watch this whole video. Hey, if you need to pause it from time to time, it's okay. I had to stop this from time to time. This has taken literally months for me to put it all together because, man, it's hard to talk about kids and abuse. But wouldn't it be amazing if Lakeview Church was a place of safety and refuge for kids, any kid who came through from an abusive situation? I think it's worth that. So let's go ahead and move into our content as we talk about identifying and preventing child abuse. Okay. So one of the reasons that we say Lakeview Kids needs to be a fun and safe place is because we want to have good first impressions by guests and parents. When they come and entrust us with their kids, we really want them to bring them back. So can we start with just the basics, agreeing that we need a fun and safe place for Lakeview Kids? That's the basic building block for any kids ministry. And let's also acknowledge that there is a liability element to this. We have to have a safe place because the church can be sued. We are liable for anything unsafe that happens on our property. So if we want the church to be financially stable, if we want the church to be funded for its mission, then we have to make sure that we are being responsible and not overly risky, because anything that happens on our property, the church is liable for in a court of law. And I think the last thing that we could all agree on is that we need to have a fun and a safe place because kids are learning how to trust here. They are learning to trust an invisible God that they cannot see. And the only way they are learning about that is through you. And you are it. You are the method. You are the means that God is using to reach kids. Do you remember this Bible verse from Romans? It says, how then can they call on the one they haven't believed in? And how can they believe the one of whom they haven't heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? Paul is making the argument here that unless there's people involved, there's no way for people to be saved. And this applies directly to kids ministry. Kids won't be able to hear about Jesus unless they are present, unless you are present and the two of you are talking together about Jesus. We need kids to come to kids' church. It's got to be a fun and a safe place for them. Okay, now I want you to think about this idea of church being a fun place and a safe place, because I'm going to give you a stat that's jarring, and it has some implications for what we can do as a church. 90% of victims are abused by someone that they know and trust. 90%. That's a lot of people. So what does that say about the church? Well, one thing it says to me is that I can't assume that anybody is safe, even if they are familiar. In other words, somebody can be abused by somebody that's in their family. They can be abused by somebody that they have an existing relationship. They may even have a trusting relationship with that person, but that doesn't mean that abuse can't happen in that relationship. It also means that there is a possibility for trust to be broken within church. We want church to be a fun and safe place. We're big on trust, but even in trusting relationships, victims have been hurt. So we as a church need safeguards. We need transparency to demonstrate that children will not be abused here. We need to be able to show parents, guests, people that have been hurt, or people that have relatives that have been hurt. We need to be able to demonstrate to them that our church truly is a safe place for them. And that's why we need to minimize the opportunity for abuse. I hope that makes sense on why this is important for us to minimize the risk for abuse to happen, because it can happen and has happened at churches. I do want to go over what we can do with children. I want to outline a code of conduct, and this is actions and speech that are permitted and encouraged by our kids team. So for instance, you can praise a child, you can encourage a child, you can give affirmation to a child and say, hey, you did a great job on that. I really like how, well, you did that thing. That's great. Kids need that. Achievement-based rewards. That's okay. If you're giving out prizes for kids that come up onto the stage and they complete the game, that's fine. Asking permission to touch someone. Hey, high five. That's all right. You're asking them. They give you a high five. Super. Giving a child a pat on the back or the shoulder. That's okay. Side hugs, handshakes, fist bumps, high fives. All okay touch. Kindness, just being kind to someone, that is okay. You don't have to be reserved and stiff, and you can be kind. You can even touch a child. That is okay in public, right? We want to do that in public where other people can see, the security cameras are there. That's okay. But let's talk about some stuff that is not okay. This code of conduct is not technically illegal, but it's discouraged. And so we want to go over that with you here. We won't have isolated interaction with children at Lakeview Kids. In other words, you won't ever be one-on-one with a child in a private setting. This protects the child, and it makes sure there's plenty of accountability and transparency for anything that happens between you and a child. We also won't have any kind of jokes with double entendre or sexual connotations. Those are out of place and inappropriate. Similarly, we won't use profanity or swearing, even if we're frustrated or mad, or even if you don't mean anything by it. That is out of place and not appropriate for any minors. Favoritism. We don't want to show or display any kind of favoritism towards any of our students. Again, sometimes, as we'll see later, this can be used to groom children and to show them that they're special. We're not going to go anywhere close to that, so we won't hand out special treats, toys, privileges to specific children. Even if you have a favorite, you're not going to show favoritism. Giving gifts to individual children. Now, again, we'll give something to the group as a whole, or if there's a contest and the winners all get a prize, but we're not going to give out something just to one child. There always has to be a good reason. For instance, I could say, well, we're doing it for all the kids who have birthdays this month, or we're doing it for everybody who memorizes the memory verse. But I'm not going to ever give out a special treat to one particular person. Again, that can be interpreted as a grooming behavior. Self-initiated hugs. This one I need to clarify what this is. Self-initiated hugs are when you tell a child to give you a hug. So that would be like, come and give me a hug, or come over here and let's hug. Right? When you're telling them as an imperative sentence, that is different than asking, hey, can I have a hug? Or do you want to give me a high five? Like when you're asking, that gives them the permission to say yes or no. When you're telling, come and give me a hug, that's a power dynamic, because now, even if you're saying it in a playful tone or a nice tone, even if you don't mean anything by it, it's a power dynamic. You as the authority and the adult or the instructor have the power, and you're giving a command. And again, for some children that have come out of abusive relationships or they've been forced to do things that they do not want to do, this can be very disturbing. So we will not tell a child that they have to give us a hug. We'll always use a question if you're using that as a prompt. Taking photos of individual children. We will not take pictures, close-ups of kids by themselves. Again, a staff or maybe our staff photographers, they'll sometimes take group photos, or they'll take, if they're going to take an individual child photo, that's going through our communications team, which has lots of checks and balances to make sure those photos aren't being misused. But for our team, we won't take individual children's photos. If I ask you to ever take a picture of your class, show me what you're doing, again, make it of a group setting, some wide shot, something like that. But in general, just don't take pictures of individual kids. Let the staff do that so that we can make sure it's for church purposes and not being misused in any way. Exchanging contact info with minors is also not allowed. So you may not give out your phone number to a minor. They cannot give you their phone number. You can't ask them, hey, can I have your Instagram handle? Nope. It doesn't matter if they're 14 or 16 or 17. You may not exchange contact info with minors because, next one, private communication with minors is not allowed on our team. So you cannot send a text to the student leader in your room. You cannot accept a Facebook request from the 9-year-old who's got a Facebook account. You can't do that. Why? Because so often those private channels have been used to start a habit of trust, building secrets, and then become a venue for a predator to try to get a child to do something that they're not allowed to do. So we will not go there. And if you've noticed in the school systems, they're really cracking down on this hard, because schools have been hit by lawsuits big time from teachers, gym directors, coaches who have had private communication with minors, maybe a preteen or a teenager, and then it's evolved into a sexual relationship. That is abusive because, again, you have this power dynamic and you have a huge age gap. So we will not have any private communication with minors. If you need to speak to a student leader digitally, or if I ever need to email a student leader digitally, I always CC a parent, or I will CC another staff member. I will include it so that it's a group setting, and then there's accountability. Then there's transparency, right? So everybody can know what Pastor Jonathan is saying, and there's not any question of, what's he doing? Why is he contacting my daughter? Any of that, right? So that makes sense? Again, all of these are not allowed at Lakeview Kids. It's not that it's illegal. It's not illegal for you to text an 11-year-old, but it is not wise. And because we want to be above reproach in our witness, we will not allow any of this on our team. Finally, these elements in our code of conduct are illegal. These are things that not only can you not do, but if you were to do them, you would face legal consequences, fines, jail time, etc. So for instance, if you were to use action or speech that humiliates or degrades children, if you're berating children, that can be verbal abuse depending on what you say or do, and that is illegal. Corporal punishment, if you use physical punishment at church to discipline a child, again, that is illegal. You do not have the right or the authority as a non-parent to inflict physical punishment on a child. Touching private areas, a child's breast, genitals, or bottom is not allowed. That is sexual abuse, and you cannot do that. If you were to swat a child's bottom, it's not allowed. if you were to touch a child's private areas, not allowed. That is abusive and it is illegal. Romantic or sexual contact of any kind between an adult and a minor is not allowed. And even for our student leaders, if you're a 14-year-old watching this, like, your romantic or sexual contact cannot be towards a child, right? That is illegal. Finally, showing pornography under any circumstances, that is not allowed. And these probably make sense. Probably looking back going, yeah, I get it. I would never do that. But I have to tell you that because stuff has happened before, right? In churches, no less. And we have to be above reproach. So we're wanting to make sure everybody is clear on that. These things are illegal. And if we were to find out that something like this had happened, not only would you be dismissed from the team, but we would also report your behavior to the authorities for prosecution. Children's safety is too important for us to turn a blind eye and pretend like it didn't exist. Because here are the facts. Some of you are like, boy, why are we going into all this? This is really serious. But here's the deal. It is serious. And in the United States, we have a huge problem with abuse of children. The average age for reported child abuse is 9 years old. That means some is older than that, some is younger than that. And this is only reported child abuse. 9 years old, that's a fourth grader. More than 90% of abusers are people who the children know, love, and trust. These are coaches, these are sometimes step parents, these might be a teacher, these could be a pastor, could be a cousin. 90% of the abusers are trusted, and that trust is broken and abused. 30 to 40% of victims are abused by a family member, and 50% are abused by someone outside the family, but someone that they know, love, and trust. 85% of child abuse victims never report their abuse. That's the vast majority. And it's so sad because so many kids have experienced this and never reported because there's this huge sense of shame, guilt, and this false feeling like it's their fault. So we need to be very aware of that. 20% of the victims are solicited online, which again, a great reason not to allow your kids to have unsupervised access online. These are serious facts, and as Christians, we don't just look at this in shock and horror, but we rise up to the occasion and advocate for children's safety. And that's why we're doing this training. It's not just to say, oh, how terrible the world is. It's to say we have to be part of the solution in creating a safe space for children, being very aware that many of the kids that walk through Lakeview Kids have been, are being, or will be abused. There are two stages that I want you to be aware of when you think about, well, why are we doing all these things? I don't understand. There are two things that abusers will do to try to get their opportunity to abuse a victim. And so when we're aware of the methods or the stages that an abuser will use, it can help us understand what to look for and why these policies need to be in place so that we can create safety for kids. The Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network defines grooming as a manipulative behavior that the abuser uses to gain access to a potential victim. It will coerce them to agree to the abuse and reduce the risk of being caught. So grooming is something that happens. Sometimes you see about this in the news, where basically they will try to select someone who they think is vulnerable, and they will try to get access to them somehow. So they have regular interaction with this person. It could be online, it could be physical, it could be wherever. They'll try to isolate that victim into some kind of special relationship or into some kind of secluded area. They will try to establish trust. Maybe they'll keep secrets together. And then they will desensitize that person. So essentially what desensitization is when the person gradually wears down the natural response, the reaction that we have when somebody does something unnatural to us. So for instance, in this case, it would be touching or talking about sexual topics, those things that initially might shock a child. In desensitization, they will attempt to make it normal, their conversation or the way that they touch the person. And then the final stage is the attempt to make the end goal of the behavior seem normal. So whatever form the abuse is, that is the final goal of the abuser, is to try to make the behavior seem natural so that it is not reported or not protested, that sort of thing. So those are the stages: finding somebody vulnerable, gaining access, isolating them, establishing trust, desensitization, and then naturalization. We mentioned that one of the stages is trying to identify a potential victim. These are things that we can look out for too, so that we know who might be at risk. So for instance, we might look for a child who is passive or lonely or quiet or comes from a troubled background. And we might recognize, hey, this child is potentially at risk for being abused. And so if we're aware of that, we can give special attention to those kids and make sure that they're loved, that they're known, that they're safe. Again, if someone is passive, lonely, overly quiet, or they come from some kind of troubled background, maybe you know about their family situation and you know that they're from a single parent family, or there's some kind of family crisis. Maybe you know there's some substance abuse going on. Again, those are risk factors. It doesn't mean that if somebody comes from a single parent family that they're being abused. No, that's not at all. But there's a greater likelihood that they would be at risk for abuse, and that's just looking at statistics. So again, if you know about what to be aware of and what to look for, then you can help be part of the protection that a child needs. Well, we want you to be aware of the signs of child abuse so that you can potentially help a child discover freedom, even through a church. So if you know what the signs are, you are one step closer to helping a child find freedom. And some generic signs would be things like withdrawal. So this would be a change in behavior for them where they're withdrawn, where before they weren't withdrawn. Maybe they have some other kind of behavior that's a sudden change, or maybe their performance changes. They used to be really good at school and now they're just way down. Maybe they have a sudden loss of self-confidence, and all of a sudden, where they used to be very outgoing, now they're not. Maybe you see self-harm, or they talk about hurting themselves. Those are generic signs of possible abuse. And again, those could be signs of other things too. Okay, so we don't need to read into it, but those are possibilities. And we'll show you some specific ones for physical abuse, sexual abuse, and I'll review neglect really quick, because neglect is also a common form of abuse. That would be things like poor cleanliness, a child that's hoarding food, or where their dress or their demeanor shows that there really isn't appropriate attention to their personal care or hygiene. Those could be indicators of neglect. But for physical abuse, you would have things like frequent physical injuries, or a parent might say, oh, my kid's so clumsy, they're always hurting themselves. Maybe if their injuries don't fit, or they don't seem to fit the explanation given, they say, oh yeah, my daughter dropped an iron on her arm. Well, that doesn't make sense. Why would a daughter drop an iron on their arm? Right? If there's conflicting explanations, the child says one thing, but the caregiver says another thing in terms of how they got injured, or if there's habitual absence to a school without a credible reason, because sometimes parents will keep a child at home until the physical evidence of the abuse has gone away. Maybe if they have long-sleeved or high-collared clothing on hot days, it could be an attempt to hide injuries, or if they have awkward movements or difficulty walking, and you're oh wow, something's off, they're walking kind of weird today. Hey, is everything okay? Again, these could be signs of physical abuse. Not necessarily saying that any one of these is in and of itself, but it could be an indication of physical abuse. Some signs of sexual abuse would be things like a new or unusual fear of certain people or places. So again, emphasis on a new fear. Some kids, when they come in right away, they aren't comfortable with a certain gender, or maybe they're not comfortable with older people or younger people or bearded people. But if there's a new fear or an unusual fear, that could be an indication. If they refuse to talk about a secret that they have with some other adult or an older child, and they won't talk to you about that secret, that could be an indication. If they suddenly have money, toys, or gifts without reason, as a parent, that's always a concern. If you come home and your kid has $100, you're like, where did you get that $100? Oh, my friend gave it to me, but he told me not to tell. Like, what? That is a concern. If they think of their self or their body as dirty or bad, that is an indication that they're hearing that somewhere. What's going on? If they exhibit any kind of adult behaviors or knowledge, you wonder like they're drawing pictures that are graphic or have frightening images in their drawings or in their play. Again, that could be an indication of sexual abuse. They might have new nightmares or sleep problems that can't really be explained, or they just seem to be not as friendly as they used to be, distracted or distant. They could have an eating habit change or a mood swing. There's lots of different things. And I hope you're beginning to see like, wow, this could be anything, right? Like any one of these could indicate sexual abuse. Potentially. One of the things that you're seeing, hopefully, is that we as humans are complex beings and we react differently to different situations. So depending on what kind of abuse a child has endured, they may respond differently depending on the stage of life that they're in. So there's lots of different possibilities. And again, you're not expected to memorize all these or have them on a list somewhere. But we do want you to be generally aware of these so that if something seems off, you can have this in your mind like, oh, I wonder if everything's okay for this child. So what do I do? What do I do if I think that maybe this child is being abused? Well, the first thing I would say is don't assume. Don't assume, ask openly. If there's a visible injury, ask how the child was injured. Show care and concern, just like you do for anybody, and show that you really want to know, hey, are you okay? What happened? I see you got this bruise on your arm. Is everything all right? Let them share. Don't give them a directed question like, is somebody abusing you? That's a leading question that won't help. But ask an open-ended question out of care and concern. What do I say? Well, if a child discloses some kind of abuse is happening, then here's what you need to do. You need to say, I believe you. You need to say that. Your default needs to be belief, not criticism. And it's going to be hard. The first time you hear, be like, what? No, I know your dad. He would never do that. That may be what you feel or think, but that is not what you will say. When a child discloses that they have been abused, you say, I believe you. This is important. So many victims do not have anybody who believes them. But research shows that if a child is believed and is given help right away, the recovery rate and success for that child is much greater. And because the child almost always knows their abuser, they feel manipulated and very confused about what's going on, especially if it's a relative or a loved one that's doing the abusing. So please believe the child. Then let them know this wasn't your fault. So many kids feel like they are responsible for what happened. You can tell them that it wasn't your fault that your mom did that to you. It wasn't your fault that your big brother did that to you. The last thing you need to tell them is, I will help you. I will help you. Now, you may feel like, I don't know how to help them. That's okay. You're not having to solve this problem all by yourself, but that child needs to know that you are a person that is going to help them. So this is what you need to remember. If a child does disclose that they are being abused, I believe you. It was not your fault that that happened to you. I am going to help you. All right, that's what you need to say to that child. After that, here's what's going to happen. We're going to show immediate care for that child, making sure that that child is safe. The next thing is you are going to immediately notify a staff person. A staff person is not a coach. A staff person is a person that is paid by the church and has a legal responsibility to the church and everybody that comes here. So that would be a children's director, children's pastor. Those two people, you need to let one of us know right away. And then we are going to notify our chief of staff or executive pastor. We'll notify our lead pastor. That has to be done right away. Okay. Obviously, you're not going to declare that on a radio, but you are going to call for the director or the pastor right away and notify us. There are things that we have to do to make sure that the church is protected and to make sure that the parents and anybody that does need to be notified is notified right away. You don't have to worry about that, but you do have to let us know. The third thing that's going to happen is that we are going to report it to the state. And if the child discloses it to you, you will be involved in that process. I'll show you what we're going to do. It's not as scary as it may sound, but we are going to make a phone call to the state, to the Department of Child Services, and make sure that that child is getting the protection that they need. The last step that we do at Lakeview is we document everything that happened, we review it as a staff, and we make sure we follow up with the appropriate parties. That may or may not include the family members, again, depending on who is the alleged abuser. If it's a parent, we're not going to be like asking the parents about it, but if it's a grandparent, we might ask the parents. There's things that we can do depending on the situation, okay? So how do you notify the state? Well, you call this number, 800-800-5556. You don't have to memorize that number, although it'd be great if you had that in your phone as a contact. This gets you to the Department of Child Services where you can report child abuse. And if you are a person, and you have reason to believe that a child is a victim of child abuse or neglect, you are required by law to make a report to DCS or to the local law enforcement. You don't have to prove that the child is being abused. That's not your responsibility, but you are responsible to report the concern. And anybody that makes a good faith report based on reasonable grounds is immune from prosecution, meaning nobody can get upset at you for calling the state and saying, hey, I'm concerned that this child may be abused. And if the abuse has happened recently, within the past 72 hours, a medical evaluation by a sexual assault nurse examiner is available by going to a local emergency department. In other words, if a child has been assaulted sexually within the last day, 2 days, 3 days, they can go to a hospital or a local ER and get examined by a nurse there. And that is important in a couple different ways. It provides traumatic care for the individual, but it can also help in the prosecution of the perpetrator. So, reporting abuse, 800-800-5556. This is how we contact the state and let them know about our concern. When you call, you will be asked a couple things. You'll be asked who was involved. You'll be asked what occurred. You'll be asked when and where it occurred, the extent of any injury sustained, and any other relevant information. So they're just going to ask you for the facts. That's all they're going to ask you. They're not going to tell you what's going to happen next. They're not going to give you all the details. They're just trying to figure out what are the facts as you understand them, and then they will take the issue from there. They will begin their investigation, and they will make sure that the child is properly protected. The agency, not you, not me, the agency will determine the legitimacy of the threat and the appropriate response. So they have a system here, all kinds of different steps that they take when you call or when anybody calls and notifies them. And you can take a moment to look through the steps if you're curious what all happens behind the scenes. But the important thing to recognize is that there is a system to protect both the victim and the alleged victimizer. If the report is not true, if the child is just making something up, that will be discovered and nothing is going to happen to the person being charged, all right? If the child is being abused, that child is going to be moved into a safe place. And again, you can't determine where that is, when that is. We have to let the Department of Child Services do their job and do the investigation and make sure that the kids are protected. Now, you and I both know no system is perfect, no government system is perfect, but neither are you and neither am I, all right? And what we can't do and what we won't do is not say anything. We're not going to do our own church investigation and decide whether or not, the child is really being abused or not. Nope, that is not what's going to happen. That is how churches end up covering up abuse. And so we are not going to do that. If there is a suspected abuse, we are going to put it out there. We're going to be accountable. We're going to be transparent. We're going to do everything by the book so that our witness is protected, so that kids are protected. There's just too much at stake for us to do nothing. So we're going to do something, and we're going to call the state. All right, so what are our expectations of you? We want you, as a Lakeview Kids team member, to follow our code of conduct. If you need to rewind this video and take a look at it again, Remember the things that are in green. These are the things that we want to encourage you to do to provide a safe place for kids. We also want you to be aware of risk factors and signs of abuse. We hope that this has helped you either remember if you've taken something like this before, or learn if you've never been exposed to this kind of curriculum or teaching before. We want you to know what the signs are of potential abuse. And finally, we want you to know how to respond if a child shares that they are being abused. These are our expectations for anybody on our team. And again, this is not easy to talk about. You probably know the pickup. This is hard for me to talk about because just the concept of a child being abused is so horrendous. But it is so important for us as representatives of Christ to be able to say, this is going to be a safe place for any child. Any child can come here and discover who God is and discover the one person who will always be their safe place. It's got to be us. It's got to be to Jesus' glory. So if you've got questions, please reach out to me. Let me know what questions you have. I thank you for watching this video to the end. There will be a short quiz, so please make sure you take the quiz to show that you have completed this. And again, do your very best to make this a safe place for every child. There are abuse survivors at Lakeview Kids. There really are. Some of them are serving right alongside you, okay? And so this is a real thing that happens way too often in America, and we all need to be greater aware of what the signs are and how to prevent it, okay? All right, I appreciate your listening. Thanks for giving us your full undivided attention, and I will see you in the future on a Sunday. Thanks so much for being part of our team and making Lakeview Kids a fun and safe place.